1 hour and 15 minutes. That's how long it took Donald Trump to commit what might be a violation of a newly reinstated gag order that was placed on him by a federal judge. Last night at 7:06 p.m., Judge Tanya Chutkan reinstated her gag order on Trump in the 2020 election case brought by special counsel Jack Smith. The gag order had been put on pause for 9 days, while Judge Chutkan reconsidered her decision and heard new arguments from the special counsel and Donald Trump's criminal defense team. Trump's attorneys wanted it removed on First Amendment grounds, but Judge Chutkan reiterated in her ruling last night that, quote, as the court has explained, the First Amendment rights of participants in criminal proceedings must yield, when necessary, to the orderly administration of justice. And contrary to defendant's argument, the right to a fair trial is not his alone, but belongs also to the government and the public. Defendants' repeated appeals to broad First Amendment values therefore ignored that the court, pursuant to its obligation to protect the integrity of these proceedings, recognized those values, but in balancing them against the potential prejudice resulting from certain kinds of statements, found them outweighed. The gag order limits what Trump can say about potential witnesses in the case, as well as the special counsel and his staff. But it does not stop him from attacking President Biden, the Justice Department, or even Judge Chutkan herself. One of those potential witnesses is Trump's former Attorney General, William Barr, who Trump slammed on social media last night a little more than an hour after the judge had filed her decision. At 8:21 p.m. last night, Trump posted, quote, I called Bill Barr dumb, weak, slow-moving, lethargic, gutless, and lazy. A rhino who couldn't do the job. That's in all caps if you're listening. Bill Barr is a loser, all caps. Judge Chutkan and the special counsel's team have not yet responded to the social media attack on Bill Barr, but the remarks are part of a pattern for the former president. While the gag order was on pause last week, Trump lashed out at another potential key witness in the case, Mark Meadows. On Tuesday last week, Trump weighed in on a report from ABC News that Meadows, Trump's former White House chief of staff, had testified in the case under an immunity deal. In the social media post, Trump insinuated that Meadows' testimony was a, quote, lie, a comment Judge Chutkan has now concluded would have been a violation of the gag order, writing in her decision last night, quote, this statement would almost certainly violate the order under any reasonable definition of targeting. The statement singles out a foreseeable witness for purposes of characterizing his potentially unfavorable testimony as a, quote, lie, quote, made up to secure immunity, and it attacks him as a, quote, weakling and coward if he provides that unfavorable testimony. An attack that could readily be interpreted as an attempt to influence or prevent the witness's participation in this case. Trump and his attorneys are appealing Judge Chutkan's decision on the gag order, and in just a moment, we will hear from former acting U.S. Solicitor General Neal Katyal about their prospects. But it's worth remembering that in a separate trial, a New York judge in the civil fraud case against Trump has already found Trump to have committed 2 separate violations of a different gag order. After the second violation, the judge fined Trump $10,000 and threatened to imprison him, a penalty that highlights the difficulty of enforcing a gag order on a former president of the United States. Leading off our discussion tonight, Neal Katyal, former acting Solicitor General of the United States and host of the podcast Courtside with Neal Katyal, and Paul Butler, a professor of law at Georgetown University and former federal prosecutor. They are both MSNBC legal analysts. Neal, give us your reaction to Judge Chutkan's decision to reinstate the limited gag order in this case. And do you agree that Trump is unlikely to succeed on the merits in his appeal?
The judge, is absolutely right. And no, I don't think there's any chance Trump is going to succeed on his appeal. So, look, I mean, first of all, Trump is basically trying to win his court case the same way as he tried to win the 2020 election, which is to mix up a bunch of his lawlessness and his intimidation and combine it together. And the judge's order here is really hard to appeal. He's going to try, just like he tried 62 times in 2020 with different courts to try and claim some sort of election problems. And he lost them all, and he's going to lose this. And he's going to lose this, Jonathan, for two reasons. One is the judge's order is very surgical. It even allows Trump to attack Biden, attack a lot of things. The one thing she said you can't do, foment violence against witnesses or intimidate the truth-seeking process. And that's exactly what Donald Trump is doing. And that's the second point why I think she's on such firm ground. No one on this planet Earth has made a better case for why this gag order needs to be in effect than a guy named Donald Trump. He provided the very best evidence against his motion, and you were referring to that earlier, Jonathan, when you talked about his tweets about Bill William Barr, his tweets about Mark Meadows. All of this shows the gag order is absolutely necessary because Trump is dangerous. He's a danger to the witnesses, he's a danger to the prosecutors who he lies about, and most of all, he's a danger to the rule of law.
You know, Paul, the judge in Trump's civil fraud trial in New York has seemed reluctant to bring the hammer down on Trump for gag order violations, only fining him $5,000 for his first violation, $10,000 for his second, but not much of a penalty for a so-called billionaire, self-described billionaire. How do you think Judge Chutkan will handle any violations?
I think it's going to be also with fines. She has the power to put Trump in jail if he continues to violate. But I think that's extremely unlikely unless he does something super egregious that the judge thinks is putting people's lives in danger. But the two fines last week from the judge in the civil fraud case weren't the only times that Trump has been sanctioned in that case. Last year, where Trump refused to do something that he had to do, which is to turn over documents to Letitia James, then the judge held him in contempt and fined him $110,000. Jonathan, guess what? That worked. So fines may actually work on the former president, but the $15,000 that Trump was fined last week was chump change. It's got to be billion-dollar or fines that are suited for a billionaire that might make a difference.
Did he pay that $110,000? He paid it. Okay, because, ask of his lawyers. He doesn't pay them.